Are you too busy? Too stressed out? Unhealthy? Then this is the place for you. Welcome to Balanced Living for Busy Professionals, where we help you create wellness and balance with a holistic approach that will work for you, even with the busiest of schedules, so you can live the life you want. And now, here's your host, Diane Randall.
Hello and welcome to Balanced Living for Busy Professionals. I'm so happy about today's show because we're talking about that inner critic, that voice in our heads, those thoughts that may judge us and say the most awful things like I'm fat, I'm ugly, I'm not smart enough, I'm not worthy. I am very happy about this subject. I love studying the mind. Because we all have inner critics. And I remember when my thoughts controlled my life. So I've spent a lot of time learning and understanding how these thoughts work so that you have tools that help you create the external world that you want. Because after all, our thoughts create our reality based on the beliefs that we hold. Today, my guest is Dr. Colleen Georges. She's a national certified positive psychologist and coach and a lecturer in counseling at Rutgers University. And she's here to talk to us about how to quiet our inner critic and re-script the stories we tell ourselves. Dr. Colleen Georges, welcome to Balanced Living for Busy Professionals.
Thank you, Diane. I'm really excited to be here.
I am happy you're here because we are all familiar with that inner critic that lives in our head. So I'm just happy you're here to kind of help us understand what that inner critic is about and how we can re-script the stories that we tell ourselves.
Absolutely.
So before we get started, tell us what positive psychology means.
I love that question. Well, so positive psychology officially launched in 1998, and it was Martin Seligman. Very interestingly, did his large portion of his career studying learned helplessness. And then in his later career, he was the president of the American Psychological Association in 1998. And it was around that time that he had his daughter was young, and they were gardening together, and they were having a conversation. And she started talking about how she decided that she wasn't going to whine anymore. And it was just this whole idea about how she was so empowered and optimistic at this very young age. And it's sort of this little conversation with his daughter. It basically launched a complete shift in his research and his work. And he basically launched what he called positive psychology. And what he said was that the field of psychology as it had existed was by nature very much a field that sort of diagnoses what's wrong with people, right? That's how we understand it. The DSM-4 or now 5, figuring out what's my diagnosis. When we meet a psychologist, we often think like, oh, are you trying to figure out what's wrong with me? So positive psychology is really sort of kind of the flip side of that. So it's not so much that it ignores what's wrong or problems or ignores weaknesses and limitations, but it focuses largely on diagnosing what's right with you. So what's right with people, what are their strengths, what's right in people's lives, what resources do they have in their lives, and how can we basically deal with challenges that we're facing instead of, again, sort of thinking, this is why I'm broken, thinking, well, what are all the resources that I have within me and around me that can help me overcome these things I'm facing? And instead of just kind of going from dysfunctional to functional, go the step beyond to flourishing. So that's what positive psychology is.
Awesome. I never knew what that meant.
Yeah.
I never did. So thank you. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
Actually, talking about positive, I want to talk about our subject for today, that inner critic. Basically, what we're saying is that voice inside your head that judges and says the most awful things.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't think there's a person out there that doesn't have one.
Exactly. So that voice is called the negative self-talk, inner critic. So what do you have to share with us to help us to really handle and inquire those thoughts and when they come up in our heads? How can you help us with that?
Sure. Well, I always say that it seems now that the large part of my work is sort of focusing on helping people do that. So a lot of the clients that I work with one-on-one are dealing with anxiety, are dealing with, a lot of worrying and catastrophizing and sort of ruminating over issues that they've faced in their lives and sort of going through this constant internal dialogue about, again, what's broken, what's wrong within me, what's wrong around me. And I got into this work largely because that was how I lived for many years of my own life. And I would say for at least 10 years, I feel like my sort of negative internal dialogue or my inner critic was sort of like running the show, for me in my own life. And it just got to the point where things were so, so difficult that in my mid-20s, I was having many, many panic attacks each day. And so it's not just a mental health challenge. It becomes somatic. It becomes a physical challenge. So it can manifest itself in physical ways. So, I think we've got people who, again, when they're under stress or when they're very much allowing that sort of negative internal dialogue to run their lives, we have people who are having headaches and neck aches and back aches and TMJ from grinding their teeth at night and a lot of the things that many of us experience. We may not know what those things are. Some people may even go to a doctor and think that there's something else going on and find out that it may be more mental and somatic in nature versus physical.
Exactly. We're running a movie of the past
exactly
in our heads
yeah.
and of the future instead of being present. But a lot of times we don't get that. I remember years ago, I heard someone say that you didn't have to listen to every thought that came in your head. And I swear it blew my mind many years ago. So I was always interested in this kind of work. And even with my workshops, we talk about those thoughts because I feel that this is what's in the way for most of us, whether it's food, whether it's weight, it's those old thoughts about the past or the future that are keeping us from being present. So what do you say about that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And again, when you talked about old movie playing, I really do think of it very much as a script, the script for a book or the script for a movie, but how we function as if it's almost like we sort of get it in our heads that we do have to listen to every word that the script is telling us and that we have to live it out exactly how it's playing in our heads. Like there's something that's been dictated or predestined in some way. And I think it's sort of, we would think perhaps that it should be intuitive or that on some level we must know, right? That we have control over this. But when you think about it, how many times we say things like, well, I don't have control over it, or I can't control how I feel, I can't control how I think, or I lost control. We use those phrases all the time.
I hear that so much. It's not easy. I hear that so much, and that is such the human condition today.
It is.
I have no control, and it's very interesting that you say this because you listen to people and you know that it's the thoughts that they believe, the thoughts that they are holding that makes them feel that they're out of control.
Right.
So what do you say to people when you meet people that feel that they don't have any control? What do you say to people who feel that they don't have control over their lives or over certain situations?
I think it's really a matter of getting to understand, as you know, in your work with clients, it always is, everybody's story is different. None of us are running exactly the same script for exactly the same reasons, but getting a sense of understanding. I think one of the big things is understanding what are the particular areas that are really of the greatest challenge for a person? Because I've kind of developed a little system of rescript that I can, that I'll be happy to talk about. But I think for each person, what their challenging areas may not very well be the same. I think we probably, each of us are challenged in these there's 8 areas, but I think for each person, it's different in terms of what is most salient for a person. And I like to understand first, what are those thoughts telling you? Where are you spending most of your time? What script exactly is running, and what is its, sort of focal point? And I think once we understand a little bit better about sort of tracking thoughts, which is largely what I start doing immediately with anybody that I'm working with, just beginning the process of tracking your thoughts. I always ask people, when do you find yourself sort of spiraling into that place where in many cases we probably each of us can think of a time when we sort of had lost time, so to speak, right? You sort of get into this place where you get in your head, and then like all of a sudden you realize that you've been in there for a while, and maybe what time you started, and you look at the clock and you're like, oh damn, like it's been 15 minutes, or when does it happen? What's preceding it? What is it about? What is it telling you? What are the topics that it's talking about to you? What is it upset about? What's it angry about? What's it afraid of?
Okay.
Yeah. And I think once we understand it's almost like we can talk back to it. So I talk about re-scripting, but I think in many ways, it's also part of that re-scripting is sort of being able to speak back to that voice and say, no, I'm not going to do this.
Speak back to the voice and inquire, what is it? Was this thought real? Is it true? Yeah. Is this really true? What's going on in my head right now?
Exactly.
So if I'm saying I can't move forward in my life, my boyfriend did all these things to me, even though it happened 20 years ago.
Right.
How would you help me to move forward?
Well, I think that I can share, I'll share just kind of a quick brief overview and then touch upon answering that specific question.
Okay.
So the kind of 8 areas that I deal with in the re-script are releasing rumination, and I'll talk about that. E, engaging versus evading. S is seeking strengths. C, challenging, catastrophizing. R, restricting regret. I, inviting imperfection. P, pursuing passion and purpose. And T, thinking thankfully. I think in the kind of scenario that you just mentioned, a few of the things that I hear there certainly are releasing rumination. There's a little bit of evading going on there, perhaps evading new relationships, and regret. Right. So I think one of the things that happens, right, is that especially we're talking about a relationship that didn't work out, is that we may be ruminating over things that were done to us. So we might be spending time thinking about how unfair it was that someone treated us in this way. And it's not that it's wrong to think those things, but when we spend many, many years sort of continuing to go over them and over them and over them, that it's no longer something that's helping us understand. It's just something that we're sort of, again, the script that we're allowing to determine what we do next. And
yeah. So is it what someone did to me, or is it what am I telling myself?
Well, it's both. It's right. It's what am I telling myself about what someone did to me, right?
Okay.
So when we ruminate, it sort of leads to other things, right? So if we're ruminating over something, in this case, let's say we're, sort of thinking about what's been done to me, we may evade having new relationships or going out there to see, again, who's out there, what's available to us. We may say, you hear people say things like, and I know I've said it myself, I'll never love again. And, I'm just gonna, I realize that people are terrible and guys suck or girls suck. And I'm never gonna, put my heart out there again. I mean, we've all kind of probably been at a place where we've said something like that, or at least felt it or thought it. So we shut ourselves down. We avoid. So we evade growth opportunities. In this case, a growth opportunity could be a few things. One, obviously it's getting to know ourselves better and understanding what role we play in these relationships. And also it's allowing ourselves to go out into a place where maybe we could have a new relationship. And so I think that's a piece of it. And then there's the idea again of the catastrophizing of, because this has happened to me before, it's going to happen to me again. Because I dated 3 terrible people, that means that every other person that I'm going to date is going to be terrible. And they're probably going to do this and that. And so, I'll get into how do we re-script in a moment, but,
Yeah.
and then I think the regret, right? So we regret, we think, what did I do wrong? What did I do to make him treat me that way? Was I not this enough, that enough? What responsibility do I have in this? And then we hate ourselves for that. So there's so many different ways, I think, even just in this one example, that we can get stuck in a script that is just making it essentially impossible to move forward. I think of it like with the Groundhog Day, the movie. You're just running the same thing over and over and over again. And until Bill Murray starts to act differently,
right.
In a genuine way, not just to mess around, but to really say genuinely, you know what? I don't want this for myself anymore. And I don't have to live this way. And I'm not going to live this way because I don't deserve this. And there are possibilities that are better for me. And these are the reasons why. And I think that's where the re-scripting comes into play. I like to call it re-scripting too, because we get to do it as many times as we want. It's not something you do once. I often say I've been re-scripting for over 15 years because it's not something that stops. It's not like there's a new script and I live it out and then I stop there. Anytime we think we have room for growth, or anytime we think that we're getting stuck in any little bit of a negative cycle, even if it's not quite as bad as it once was, we always have the ability to go back in there, kind of sift through those pages again and say, all right, what's going on here this time?
Yes.
Let's kind of investigate this a little bit. Maybe some of this needs a little bit of work. I think we can continue to, again, not live that, like you said, that past script, but we can even kind of change up even the new ones that we're creating if they're not working for us anymore. Again, it's not a one size fits all, and it's not a one script fits all. We can write hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of scripts throughout our lives.
Interesting. This is so exciting. I just love this subject. I really, really do. When I teach my workshops, it's so interesting. When I talk about life changes, we always start with that inner critic, the self-talk, because what I've learned and what I see, and it's just so good that you're on here, is that a lot of times that is what's holding us back from even getting started on changing something. So if I'm feeling that I'm in the workplace and I'm not worthy and I have all this self-doubt, then to go in and ask my boss for a promotion is likely not going to happen, because I believe this is exactly what I believe about myself.
Exactly. And again, we think, you believe that about yourself, and there's a strong likelihood that you think your boss probably feels that way about you too.
Yes, exactly.
Right? Yeah. So.
Yeah, because we've projected it all over the place.
Right.
And even if somebody's looking at us too long, they don't like me.
Yes. I mean, those little things, right? You think how much those moments, and we all have them. And I think the thing that I love about this idea of re-scripting is that it helps you. I think you spoke about earlier about being in the moment and being in the present. It forces us to be in the present. It forces us to pull ourselves out of the past and pull ourselves out of the future and come back to the moment. And sort of the more you do the re-scripting, as I'm sure you get quicker, better at it.
The thoughts are coming up. They still come up. I mean, for me, they come up. But you know what? Like you just said, I can go in, inquire, and walk through a process or tools to help me realize that the thought is not true, or it just dissipates.
Realizing that, as we often, I think, have that feeling of I've fallen off the wagon, or whatever that might mean for each of us, that it's okay. It's natural. We're never going to go through life and never have a negative thought. We're never going to go through life and go, now that I've done this, I'll never have to think that way again. Of course we will. It's human nature.
I believe it. And I'll just speak for myself. It happens to me like when I'm going to teach or before I do something, especially when I teach or I'm going to be speaking in front of someone. Mm-hmm. But the great thing is I can, like you said, I can go through that process. I can inquire about that thought, and my passion or whatever I'm about to do, it totally overrides any past thoughts I may have or future thoughts about things not going. But just when I pull myself in the present, it just dissipates. And I'm just thinking that's just been many, many, many years of practice. And sometimes I get caught up in that thought. It'll come forward, it'll pop up, and it pops up because it's not just the thought. There's some kind of feeling behind it.
Oh,
Anger, confusion, something else is behind it. But now I'll just pause and go, what is this? What is going on here? I'm so happy that you teach this tool because I really think these type of tools are needed in everyday life. And I think it would really help us from not being so vulnerable with the messages that we get from our culture, society, and the media.
Yeah, I think in my TED Talk, I talked a lot about these messages because they're everywhere because of the lives that we live. Again, we think about balanced lives. We live really busy lives more and more so. And it's not terrible that we're busy, but again, as you sort of talk about just in the many topics you talk about with balanced living, there's many ways that we do have to find that balance. And I think that the busier we are, the harder it gets to have time to sort of feel like we can sit back and be introspective and think about these things. So as we develop these habits, again, we need them to become habits. And, when we're being bombarded, God, social media, we're all on Facebook and Twitter, and no matter where we look, there's always someone or something kind of talking about what it is we need to be successful. Used to be so much more geared towards adults, and now it's, it's trickled down into little kids.
Everybody's fair game. And what I like to do is tell people that I work with is turn the TV off. I mean, you gotta stop some of the messaging that comes in because the messaging is what enters our head and gives us these thoughts, bad or good, past or present.
Absolutely.
So the question is, how can we practice being present? Because that is what keeps those thoughts at bay. And one of the things I do for myself is I meditate. I meditate.
Yeah. Another way that is always really critical, I think, with kind of bringing you back to the present moment, my T in the Rescript and thinking thankfully, and we talk so much about gratitude these days, and I'm so glad we do, because I know for me, it was the critical lifesaver. It's such a big part of the work that I do with my clients and with my students is finding time to just bring yourself out of whatever sort of negativity that you're finding yourself in, whatever thought patterns you're finding yourself in. Again, with the messages, right? I think of the messages when you see something on TV and it seems to indicate, it's sort of selling you the vacation that maybe you can't afford right now. You're watching the car that you can't have, or, whatever it is, everybody has their thing. Or again, that you're struggling with weight loss or feeling attractive. We all have our triggers. And, and then we get into that place where we start telling ourselves that whatever it is that we want to do, that we're not ready for it. We're not worthy of it. We can't do it. And it gets deeper and deeper and deeper, again, into the script of negativity, that we sometimes don't even know where it started. But again, when we can come back and say, yeah, you know what? Maybe I don't have as much money as I'd like to right now for that trip. Or maybe I do, I do need to get healthier and I'm not where I want to be just yet. Or, maybe I want to get that degree and I'm only one class in, or I didn't register yet. Whatever it is, whatever our thing is, to be able to say, let me be grateful for what I've started, or the fact that I'm even thinking about the fact that I want to do this thing, or being grateful for the fact that I've been through a challenging experience that made me realize I want to do this other thing, or just bring ourselves back to a place of being grateful for whatever it is that we have. And sometimes for some people who are really, really in a tough place and they've been hit super hard, it may be the real basics, maybe that one good friend you have, or your mom.
Yeah, I've heard that having a lot of money doesn't make you happy, but that it starts on the inside. And I remember on your TED Talk, you talked about how happiness fits in with all of this.
Yeah. I mean, I always find it really interesting that I think there's sort of almost a tendency that many of us sort of have thought or maybe do think that our circumstances largely or almost completely determine how happy we can be. What's so interesting that 50% of our happiness, as some people do correctly think, is that some people are naturally more happy and more optimistic and more upbeat than others. And so 50% of our happiness is sort of this genetic set point, whatever we're sort of biologically wired to be and how we see the world. And so half of us is sort of that biological wiring. 10% is circumstances, this teeny little piece of the pie. 10%.
I wouldn't have thought it would have, I thought it would have, might have been more.
Yeah, right. And I think almost everybody, I mean, I certainly thought it was more prior to, to reading the research. And again, this is many studies worth of research. I think most of us think that what we have as far as the family that you've had or the neighborhood you grew up in, or again, resources, a home, a job, money. Yeah, of course, these things, they play a role. They play 10% of a role, and that's important. But they don't dictate as nearly as much as we think. 40% of our happiness is what we do, is what, and that's again where these things that we're talking about come into play. How we talk to ourselves, how much we allow ourselves to ruminate on things, or to avoid things that we really want to do, or to see ourselves only through flaws, or to believe that the future is terrible, to regret our mistakes, to feel like we need to be perfect, to continue doing things that feel meaningless to us, to, again, not see all that we have. Those are choices.
Yeah.
They're choices. And needless to say, right, it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to make positive choices when you're in a better place, right? When we're in a stressed place and it feels like everything's kind of coming at you all at once. Sure. I mean, it is very, very, very difficult to kind of say, all right, let me try to continue to get into this rescripting in my life, but you can. You can. It may be harder, but you can.
Because if I'm sad or depressed or from whatever I'm thinking, I'm not able to be positive, right?
Right.
How can I go from feeling that way to challenging what I'm thinking to be more positive?
I think a lot of times I like to bring people back to kind of thinking, has there ever been a moment? Can you think of a moment? Most people can. It may be a little bit more difficult for some, but a moment where you were going through something tough, but somehow you chose, or you triumphed, or you overcame it in some way. Now, most people are able to think of a moment. And I often say, well, what were the circumstances of that moment? Okay. Sometimes, somebody might say, well, when my mother died, I was in a horrible place, but I had to be strong because my daughter was also devastated and she was so close to my mother, and I had to smile for her, and I had to get her through it. And that's how I got through it. We have to use the strengths that have gotten us through other things, use them again.
That's really beautiful. So you just pull that strength from within yourself. That is beautiful. And I can recall that some of the challenges I've had, that's all I've had is that strength somewhere inside of me that it doesn't come out that much where you really need it at that level. Yeah. But every now and then I have to just go in and just pull something out to get through a challenge. And the wonderful thing is, and I'll just speak from my life, is the thing that probably I thought about the most and that challenged me the most, the next time it happened, it's just not as impactful on a negative front. It's not taking my whole life down. Maybe I'm looking at it as a piece of something. You know what I mean? Right. Instead of the whole thing. So that is what's so beautiful about this rescripting that you're talking about.
I like the idea of that imperfection is a part of the rescripting, because getting out of this place where you got to get it right every time, that you're not permitted to be flawed, that the purpose of this life is somehow to eliminate or erase all the flaws, or that I don't personally believe that. You know, I think there's some things in us that we might go, you know what? Yeah, that thing, I don't love it that much, but I'll keep it.
Right. I always say we're perfectly imperfect.
Right. I always think it's so interesting when we have those moments and when we sort of go back and then you ask somebody, well, okay, you've had that happen before. And what did you ultimately find out? And people will say, well, I found out that they actually weren't thinking negatively about me at all. It was that she just gone through a breakup, or she just lost her job. And that's why she said that thing to me, or that's why she didn't call me back, or that's why she looked at me that way, or all these things that we think are.
Right. Because the truth is, this is exactly what we're saying to ourselves. Exactly what we're saying to ourselves. And I always say, too, you can change your story at any time. Yes. It just depends on how many times you want to tell that story.
You got it.
Sometimes I say you tell that story 2 more times and then don't say it again.
When it stops being interesting, it's time for a rewrite.
Right, exactly. Because it is a story. And we can change it at any time, even though we don't think so. So, one more thing, if I'm running these movies about past and future, my inner critic the volume is ramped up. What's one thing I can do tomorrow when I wake up to start honing in on these thoughts and learning how to rescript? What can you leave us with? Yeah.
I gotta say, I'm gonna go back to gratitude. For me, I think it's the one thing in the rescript that you can't live without, I guess. I think all of them are very, very important, but it's a great place to start. And when I think of gratitude, I think of it on many levels, but I think of it's, when you wake up tomorrow, if you feel like you're going into that negative place, to be able to say, what are the things about me that I'm grateful for? Or what's one really crappy thing that happened to me years ago that right now I'm so glad happened because of why? To be grateful for it. And again, what do you have? What resources within you and around you are you grateful for that you have? So I think we always have to start getting into a daily habit. I like personally to do it at night as a real practice. My son and I do that together every night. I used to do it by myself. Mm-hmm. I'm not personally a journaler. I actually just have always done it either in my head or verbally, and it's worked really well for me that way. Some people like to journal their gratitude. Mm-hmm. And I think that once you really dedicate one part of your day, once you dedicate one part of your day to at least 3 things that you're grateful for, then, right, it becomes natural. Then it becomes something where you start to see those things regularly, and you start to see your problems in a different way. You start to see other people in a different way. It's realizing that as we become grateful for each of our experiences, that they become resources that we draw from.
And to hear you talk about gratitude, I'm just listening to you, and that really helped me to just center myself, and it kind of anchors you back in to your heart space, and you don't even think about what was going wrong in your head. So I really like that. Dr. Colleen, you've surely given us a lot of life-changing information that will literally help us change our minds, and this will help change our lives so that we can bring more joy and happiness to us. I just want to thank you for being here to talk to us today about how we can quiet our inner critic and also rescript to support our lives every day.
Well, Diane, thank you for creating a podcast that's dedicated to helping people balance their lives, both in a physical and a mental capacity. And thank you for doing good work in the world.
Well, thank you. The show's mission is to provide inner tools and strategies to help people create the life they want, even with the busiest schedule. I believe it's possible. All the experts that I bring on were once people who had no control in their lives at one point. Right. So it's all real information. There's no gimmicks, and it's free. It's free to listen. So I'm really grateful. And to everyone listening to the show today, I want to know what you think about today's episode. Dr. Colleen Georges' information, her website, and even her TED Talk will be in the show notes of this episode. You really want to take a look at that. It has extended information that can really support you after you listen to this podcast. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to Balanced Living for Busy Professionals. This podcast is sponsored by DianeRandallConsults.com. If you like this show, the best way to support it is by leaving 5-star feedback on iTunes. And please, feel free to email your questions, comments, and suggestions to feedback@DianeRandallConsults.com. Until next week, namaste.